we welcome in Kevin Anzzolin, an instructor in social sciences from UW-Stout, and his talk is entitled Translating Culture, Engaging the Northwestern Wisconsin Latinx Community from Afar.
Thank you so much. And I don't even know how much my comments today are very informal. Thank you for the introduction, Jamie. My topic today is about translation, and so I'm the only Spanish instructor here at UW-Stout. I'm in my 4th year here on the tenure track. And as we know, UW-Stout is the polytechnic within the system. And so I try to focus my courses on very much practical matters, pragmatics of language. I created the first business Spanish course here. Next semester, I'll be having a kind of health course for students in Spanish. When I came here in 2017, I walked into a class called U.S. Hispanic Literature. And I suppose in today's world, we would probably rather have the course be called U.S. Latino or U.S. Latinx Literature. But I need to change that in terms of the curriculum, no? My very humble project comes from this class and kind of what I've learned about Wisconsin. And I think I can share this with you via my very, again, humble PowerPoint. What we know is that there are a few areas in Wisconsin that have a growing number of Latinos, usually Mexicans or Central Americans. And one of those places is Abbotsford, a place which I know, and this is perhaps the closest kind of community that has seen a notable number of Latinos in the recent years. Effectively, Abbotsford has grown because of really two things: the dairy production, which has garnered a lot of migrant workers from our southern neighbors, and also Abulan Foods, which is a kind of meat packaging, sausage making factory. Abbotsford is at the present time thought to be 1/4 Latino or Spanish speaking, usually Mexican, right? And so this is really the closest place to Menominee here that has seen a notable influx of Latinos. And so this became very interesting to me, as we know that some of our institutions, Stout included, are kind of lacking diversity. And so to have a U.S. Latino course, a course on the U.S. Latino experience can be difficult. And so what I have today is kind of some thoughts towards an idea of kind of teaching translation or kind of service learning, community service from afar. And so I became interested in Abbotsford, and it's a very interesting community. And here we have a publication from Abbotsford, and I think we can see this on online. I think you guys can see it. Let's stop share, start share, window. I think we can see it now. This is the PowerPoint, the Facebook page of El Primerito. This is a Spanish-speaking newspaper, very small publication out of Abbotsford, and it's you can see here. I think you can still see the screen. They publish news items in both English and Spanish. It is run by a gentleman, and here I have his picture. If I can get the image here correct. Yes. Okay. Share screen, window. You can see again, this is kind of community service from afar. This is the gentleman that I reached out to, Alejandro Vasquez. He's from Mexico City, and he's a very nice gentleman. And as you can see, he's also a Packers fan. But effectively, he has this very small publication called El Primerito, the very first thing of the day, I guess would be the translation. I reached out to him, and it was kind of a negotiation in a certain sense. I didn't need to be very careful in a certain sense. I became aware of El Primerito and its translations. It had these articles in Spanish and English, really locally focused, things that are very local for the community there. But the translations were horrible into English, and so I need to kind of reach out in a kind of again, humble and very cautious way and say, Alejandro, your translations are into English aren't very good. And I think he was basically putting these into Google Translate and having them come out in this kind of very hermetic, very kind of clinical, kind of clunky English. And that made me, it made me a bit nervous, but also showed me an opportunity to show students how to look beyond what Dr. Google gives us. That's to say that these internet devices, these internet tools are fascinating, but they do have effectively, they don't give us everything. Moreover, if we think about translation, I think it's a good fit for UW-Stout. Again, it's very much a place about being a polytechnic, a very pragmatic place. And people are just, students want to know, well, what does this technology get to me? How do I translate? And if we look at the texts that are available in terms of translating between English and Spanish, I would suggest that they're kind of lacking. And I think the kind of definitive textbook on translation is still yet to be produced. So effectively for this, we're effectively going to be, what I've had students doing is translating parts of Alejandro's newspaper into English. And hopefully learning again about the kind of limits of online translation tools, learning about the fact that languages aren't always a one-to-one equation, and also in a certain sense highlighting the human element and the kind of special, the humanity of learning a language. Here are kind of a list of websites that serve students, that I give students, that I provide students in order to translate these Alejandro's papers, Alejandro's columns into English. I have Google Translate above there. That is, to my mind, it is the best. It is the best translation tool, but again, it's not always perfect. But I ask students to take a few sentences, take a few paragraphs, put them into these translation tools and see what they come up with, and look at the differences they come up with. And they'll see that there are real choices to be made in terms of translation. No translation is perfect. It's a lot about choices. It's not about losses or gains, but rather choices. Along the way, we can learn a lot of different terms, things like domestication, a concept like untranslatable. Those are terribly interesting to me, the fact that some kind of structures, some words simply are just untranslatable. Of course, we can talk about things like connotation versus denotation, and of course, false cognates. And so here's a good example of, again, I don't have the students do this for every article that Alejandro produces. And so some of these that I've done myself, and this is when I did myself, but I did share it with the students and ask them for their feedback. His article, as you can see here, is Los que menos ganan, those that earn the least. And so he's talking about the effects of COVID and the effects that it's had in terms of those who don't make a lot of money. And I translate it as a colloquialism on the short end of the stick. That was my best translation. Again, that's a question that I have, how to best render these things into an English that makes sense. I have students, I give them a kind of 10 points. Again, this is something that the super humble we see here. I just cut and paste this from a Word document, obviously, but it serves our purposes, I would say. Students are asked 10 questions, and at the current point, I ask them to kind of weigh in on 5, try to get to 5 of these examples, right? And so we think about impossibilities. Are there any untranslatable words? Nominalizations, the fact that we can change verbs into nouns and then nouns into verbs. Cognates, are there any false cognates or true cognates? Some cognates, some words come from Latin and obviously can be translated quite easily between languages. Some words are what we know as false cognates that have a different connotation and different meaning. Culture, are there any cultural connotations? Choices, length and punctuation is a huge consideration. Spanish is a language that just happens, just kind of breathes more. Comma splices are pretty important in Spanish. The structures are just longer. English is a very to the point, very concise language compared to Spanish. And so I ask students to think about that. And certainly for my translation, our translations really, I've had students, usually we end up shortening sentences and making one long sentence in Spanish into 2 sentences in English. Are there any colloquialisms? That's a huge thing too, or expressions that can't be translated. And again, so here, if we go back to my translation of the title, on the short end of the stick, that would be an expression in English. That's how I rendered the kind of clunky, those that gain the most, or those that earn those that earn the least. Perhaps that's successful, perhaps not. Gender in politics is big. Tenses, sometimes tenses happen differently. And of course, possessive adjectives. So again, students, if they can find 5 examples of these 10 different categories as they're doing their translation, I'm a happy camper. I'll try to move quickly. One example that I really thought was cool lately, and I saw the students do this as they were translating this, was, of course, the idea of the sana distancia. Alejandro had written an article about something that's on everyone's mind, COVID. In his article, there was a mention of sana distancia, and Google Translate, all the translation tools render this as health distance. And of course, no one, if you look at the press, of course, no one in regular English language would say, oh, we need to remain a health difference. We need to maintain a health distance. No, we say social distancing, right? And so again, interestingly enough, we're living this moment. We have this kind of new terminology, and the technology has not quite caught up, and it renders it incorrectly. Other things, he had also written about the rise in gas prices recently, and we learned petroleum. I guess we do put petroleum in our cars, but usually we put gasoline or gas, right? And so again, where these translation devices aren't bringing us to, the fact that Dr. Google, et cetera, are translating petrol as petroleum. Sometimes gender is important. Alejandro is writing for a Latino community where gender happens differently. And so we have something like meseras, which are waitresses. I rendered that as more kind of gender neutral as wait staff. But there are a ton of different examples that are really interesting. But as you can see, one of the examples here, it's a terribly lengthy sentence. It's a terribly lengthy sentence that needs to be cut. Simply said, our translation devices are not rendering this well. Finally, some colloquialisms that obviously need to be kind of thought out differently in English. And I guess finally, this idea of translation is very, I keep thinking about it. Next semester, I will be working with the Chippewa Valley Free Clinic. I'll be hopefully bringing students over there to take part. They have 2 nights of the week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, in which they invite in Spanish speakers and kind of help them get free medical care and advice. And finally, even I've been thinking about translation in my business classes. And so we have a unit on advertisements. And this was a very fun thing we had the other day, Kit Kat, and we can see here on the ad, have a break, have a Kit Kat, and we see the Kit Kat bar breaking in half. And again, I like these ideas in the sense that they don't translate easily. There's no way to render this exactly into Spanish. You can say in Spanish, of course, very easily, take a break or have a break. That doesn't translate into something that breaks apart, that's whose form is distorted or changed in a certain way. That's to say that it's a certain sense a play on words in English in a way that is not in Spanish. That's what I have. Certainly, if there are any questions, certainly, again, my presentation is quite humble and I'm still thinking about these things. But it's an activity that's really, I've thought that students have been very receptive to. They enjoy the fact that we're doing something for the community, even from afar. The fact that we are underscoring the fact that there is a diversity in terms of culture and languages within Wisconsin, I think is very important for us. And it gives them a kind of real world scenario for thinking about these issues. So I'd love to hear any comments that we have about this.
Great, thank you, Kevin. There are just some fun comments in the discussion forum if you want to look there. I don't think there are any direct questions yet. If anyone wants to share them either in the live Q&A or the discussion forum, I'm happy to read them out loud. Kevin, do you want to comment on some of the comments?
Yeah, some of the football. I guess, yeah, I suppose that would be a good, interesting point. Yeah, sure, certainly football would be translated as football, which we would say soccer. I suppose if you want to be really particular, you would say football europeo and football americano. Christopher also says, hamacar, to chill in a hammock, is a word in Paraguay. That's very interesting. I did not know that, but it makes sense. Guapo means hardworking in Paraguay, not in Mexico. Absolutely not. Guapo is obviously, absolutely. These words change a lot, right? And it's very interesting dealing with Alejandro's columns, in which we see a lot of obviously Mexicanisms, right? Regionalisms that come out. Happy camper, how would you translate into Spanish? I don't know. That's a good question. Happy camper. I will think about that. Happy camper. I suppose you would come up with some feliz. I don't know. That would be hard. I would love suggestions for that. Can you share what you have students do with the responses to the 10 items as far as class discussion or other uses? At this point, they just turn them in, Lisa. That's a good question. I'm still working on this project. Again, they need to fill out 5 of those. Maybe they'll have, again, we can imagine a column that Alejandro is working on that demands maybe all 10 of those, that has colloquialisms that aren't rendered particularly well, that has gender issues, et cetera, et cetera. But again, at this point, I want them to think about at least 5 of them. They turn that in. It would be interesting. I love your comments about thinking about other kind of future projects, what they could do. But again, at this point, it's just nice to see their kind of their translation print, even in a humble. Again, this is a very humble publication. This is certainly not the New York Times, but it serves our students well, and it's nice to give back to the community. So.
And my colleague from Superior, Lorena, wants to endorse handsome as the translation of guapo.
I mean, obviously, I thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm glad we're thinking about guapo. All these words are so interesting. You know, abusado in Spanish would mean to be ready. In Mexican Spanish would be to become ready, right? I mean, there's tons of different things. With Alejandro's pieces, it's really about, a lot of it's about length and seeing how length works out, and realizing that these online translation devices come up with these super long sentences in English that no one would ever say, right? And so it is a literal translation. It's true. It conveys certain meanings. But man, who talks like that? Who writes like that? And the answer is absolutely no one. And so again, underscoring the fact that there is a human element in our translation. Computer technology, internet technology has not brought us, is not the end all, not the end all and be all. So.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kevin and Rebecca, both our speakers. Thanks for coming to the 11 a.m. session, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your conference day. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.